Imagine one of the most remote, isolated islands on the entire planet. On it, a silent army of stone giants stands guard. They're the Moai of Rapa Nui. You might know it as Easter Island. And for centuries, they've been hiding some incredible secrets.
I mean, just look at this. It's absolutely breathtaking. These are the monolithic statues carved by the Rapa Nui people, we think somewhere between 1250 and 1500. They're just this staggering feat of human creativity, watching over their ancestral lands. But their very existence brings up a huge question.
So that's the big riddle, right? The one that's had explorers and scientists scratching their heads for generations. How in the world did a small society on a tiny island with limited resources pull off something this massive? Well, that's the mystery we're going to dig into.
All right, so first things first, we have to tackle the biggest misconception about the Moai, one that literally only scratches the surface.
When most people picture Easter Island, this is probably the image that pops into their head, right? These giant, stoic heads kind of buried in the grass. It's an iconic picture for sure, but it's also really misleading.
Because what years and years of dirt and erosion have been hiding is the rest of the story.
Yep, that's right. When archaeologists started digging, they found that these aren't just heads, they're full-body statues, some of them towering over 30 feet tall. And what's even cooler is that being buried actually protected their torsos, preserving these amazing, intricate carvings that had been worn away on the statues left out in the open. This discovery just completely changed how we see them.
So, who are the masterminds behind these giants? And how did they do it? Honestly, the logistics of this whole operation are just mind-boggling.
Get this, the Rapa Nui people made over 900 of these statues. Just let that number sink in for a second. For a pretty small, isolated population, this was a project, an obsession really, that went on for centuries.
Now let's talk about weight. You ready for this? The heaviest Moai they ever successfully put up weighed a colossal 86 tons. To give you some perspective, that's like 12 full-grown African elephants. Just incredible.
And what's wild is that almost every single one of these statues came from one single place, the quarry at the Rano Raku volcano. They were carved straight out of the hardened volcanic ash. You can still see hundreds of Moai there today, just left behind in every stage of being made. It's like a snapshot, frozen in the exact moment the work suddenly stopped.
And it's so important to remember, these weren't just statues for decoration. They were believed to be the Aringa or Ra, which means the living faces of their ancestors who had become like gods. Once they were put up on these ceremonial platforms, they would face inland, watching over their villages and protecting them with a spiritual power called mana. Okay, so this brings us to the biggest piece of the puzzle. How did they move an 86-ton statue for miles, across rugged terrain, on an island that didn't have a lot of trees?
For a long time, the main theories involved things like log rollers and wooden sledges, which would have required a ton of wood. But the evidence showed the island was suffering from major deforestation, so that theory didn't totally add up for all 900 statues. People needed a new idea.
And that new theory is that the statues walked. Seriously, researchers figured out that the Moai were actually engineered to be moved standing up. They were carved with a forward lean and a D-shaped base. So, with a few teams pulling on ropes, they could rock the statue from side to side and it would kind of shuffle forward. It's just brilliant, simple physics.
And you know what the coolest part is? This modern scientific theory lines up perfectly with the island's own ancient stories. The oral traditions have always said that the Moai walked from the quarry to their platforms, commanded by the spiritual power of the ancestors. It's like science and legend finally met up.
The era of building these statues was absolutely remarkable, but it couldn't last forever. This story of the Moai has a pretty dramatic and destructive final chapter.
So today, we can see many of these beautifully restored Moais standing proud again. But for a very long time, they all look like this, toppled over, broken. So what happened? How did these sacred protectors end up as casualties of war? Well, when the first Europeans arrived in 1722, lots of statues were still standing. But in the years that followed, things got really bad. There was a lot of conflict and warfare between the clans on the island, probably over dwindling resources. Rival groups started toppling each other's Moai as an ultimate act of disrespect, a way to destroy their enemy's spiritual power. By 1868, not a single statue was left standing.
And this period of conflict also brought on a huge cultural shift. The ancestor worship connected to the Moai started to fade away.
It was replaced by a new, warrior-based religion called the Birdman cult. This was a dangerous annual competition, and it really marked the definitive end of the Moai carving era.
So the construction stopped, and their sacred reign was over. But the story of the Moai was far from finished. Today, they're a powerful global symbol. Their legacy now reaches way beyond Rapa Nui. You can find Moai in museums all over the world. This, of course, has sparked some really important modern debates about whether these cultural treasures should be returned to the island.
And their influence is so vast, they've even made it into your pocket. You know that stone head emoji? Moai. Well, it's officially called Moai, and it's actually based on a statue in Tokyo that was inspired by the Rapa Nui Moai. How wild is that? This ancient symbol is now part of our daily digital lives.
The Moai have survived centuries of conflict and change. But today they're facing new threats, from climate change, from erosion, and even from wildfires that have caused terrible, irreparable damage. So the final question isn't just about how they were made or moved. It's about how we, today, make sure these incredible messengers from the past survive long into the future.